The 1960s were a time of intense fire activity in Chicago. Like most of the older cities in the United States, Chicago was changing. Each year, hundreds of businesses and thousands of Chicagoans moved from the city to the suburbs and left the buildings they had occupied since the turn of the century abandoned. Vagrants, vandals, and arsonists became the new tenants in the abandoned buildings and started fires that severely challenged the Chicago Fire Department and its chief, Commissioner Robert Quinn. Wearing his battered white helmet, Commissioner Robert Quinn, as always, is on the scene. When Quinn joined the fire department in 1927, his mother gave him a leather helmet. Repainted many times as he rose through the ranks, the battered old High Eagle was the only helmet Quinn ever wore. A lifelong bachelor, Quinn was frequently seen in the company of attractive women, but his true love was the Chicago Fire Department. Under his guidance, the CFD met the challenge of the 60s and became one of the finest fire departments in the world. Bob Quinn was not only a leader, but an inventor as well, and he is remembered by the fire service as the father of the snorkel. Quinn wrote the book on the use of the snorkel, and the CFD used them effectively at virtually every fire. For several years, Quinn had looked for a better way to put water on big fires. Neither ladder pipes or apparatus-mounted turrets provided a master stream that could be maneuvered with the speed and precision that he desired. After watching men trim trees and service signs from an elevating platform, Commissioner Quinn borrowed a 50-foot Pittman giraffe and had a monitor wired to the basket with a 3-inch supply hose hung from the boom. After rigorous load and stability testing, the fire department acquired the apparatus, painted it red, and put the world's first snorkel in service. The first response of a snorkel was on October 14, 1958, to a fire at the Harvey Lumber Company on Blue Island Avenue at Paulina, and Commissioner Quinn liked what he saw. Snorkel 1 was soon joined by more snorkels, each bigger and better than the one before. Operating a monitor in the basket of a giraffe was a wet job, and the crew called their rig the Snorkel. They swore it was just like being underwater. Although wet, the elevating platform added a new dimension to firefighting, and the era of the snorkel had begun. Within a few years, the elite 7-man snorkel squads were responding to every serious fire in the city to provide not only master streams, but also a whole new approach to high-angle rescue. Trapped citizens found it easier to step into a basket than to climb down a tall ladder. Commissioner Quinn did not hesitate to praise the value of his invention and proudly proclaimed,
"Right from the first call it responded to, October the 18th, 1958, the snorkel proved its worth. Now, for the first time, my men can quickly, easily maneuver themselves into position to place water with rifle shot accuracy wherever it is needed. The snorkel's speed and mobility have materially helped our department increase its effectiveness and enabled us to save countless lives and valuable industrial, residential, and commercial property that might otherwise have been lost. Equally important to any commissioner or chief, the snorkel has boosted the morale of my men by making their work a little easier and taking some of the hazards out of firefighting. I know there have been many times when I, my men, and citizens of Chicago have said, God bless those wonderful things, the snorkel."
Dubbed Snorkel Bob by the press, the commissioner was undoubtedly pleased as his magnificent machine stood shoulder to shoulder as they battled the 2 million square foot blaze at the Ford City Warehouse complex. The snorkel era in Chicago reached its peak during the time of Commissioner Quinn and began to decline with his retirement. A more lasting monument to the days of Bob Quinn is the Fire Academy. Built during his administration, it is now dedicated to his memory. Perhaps as a reminder of the constant danger of fire, the Academy is located on the site of Kate O'Leary's barn, the starting point of the Great Chicago Fire. Since the founding of the Chicago Fire Department, more than 100 Chicago firefighters have died in the line of duty. In memory of these brave men and women, the badge of each is displayed in the lobby of the Academy. A state-of-the-art facility when built, it continues to train the men of the CFD. The Academy, now under Andrew O'Donnell, Director of Training, also houses a modern photo lab and telecommunications studio to develop resources for teaching Chicago firemen and promoting public fire safety. The days of the Pompier ladders and life nets are long gone, but the facility continues to teach the latest techniques and tactics for fighting fires. Supplying fire, rescue, and EMS services to the city, the CFD conducts various kinds of field training in addition to the activities at the Academy. Watching the CFD dive team practice in Lake Michigan brings back the words of Commissioner Quinn.
All in all, I think that the fire department is one of the first lines of defense of our people. I always say they're the Marines of the civilian life.
The vacant building was fully involved before the first alarm was sounded. It was Saturday morning, and no one was in the area 2 miles south of the loop when the building was torched. The second week of November had been a time of intense fire activity, and the Chicago Fire Department was still on the scene of another fire, which had gone to a 511 and 7 special alarms. With much of the CFD apparatus still on the scene of the Goldblatt fire, equipment had to respond from all over the city to fill out the additional alarms. The Civil Defense Emergency Fire and Rescue Squad was notified, and the volunteers helped the career firemen stretch the long supply lines needed to get water on the fire. In the 1960s, Robert Quinn was also the Civil Defense Director for Chicago, and his volunteers were well trained and competent. The CD volunteers operated 6 pieces of specialized apparatus out of an old Chicago firehouse. At serious fires, the volunteers brought all kinds of special equipment and tools to the scene, and then picked up the hose when the fire was out. Although it was set up and flowing over 2,000 gallons of water per minute from its deck guns, the heat was so great when the fire blew out that the paint burned right off the high-pressure wagon. The 311 had already been transmitted for the fire at 50th and Halsted, and the second alarm companies were just getting water. As the firemen were climbing their ladders to begin ventilation, the entire building exploded.
All right, messengers, explosion. You want all ambulances in there in the 411 on who ordered? Division 4. Message received. 411 alarm fire. Battalion 11. The building is practically all about. There's firemen laying around pretty bad here. All the ambulances. 411 alarm fire, and you want 5 ambulances. The whole building's blown up. There's guys all over the street. The explosion occurred in the building on the southwest corner of 50th and Halsted. We have numerous people injured and some still in the rubble. All companies working, attempting to remove the people. Building is about 200 feet by 125. It was about 3 stories. Parts of it are level.
Well, the firemen were working like they do at any fire, and all of a sudden, without a warning, it blew out on them.
The fire and explosion occurred when the driver of a gasoline tanker inadvertently pumped several thousand gallons of fuel onto the floor of the furnace room instead of into an underground storage tank.
Well, I saw the firemen up on the ladders going up on top of the building and that, and then all of a sudden there was a big explosion. I mean, a lot of smoke and all that, but then a big explosion. And all I saw was the firemen flying off the ladders and glass and everything coming around. I turned around, and then a boulder come running down the street, and it must have hit me in the back.
There were 77 injured and 11 dead, 4 of whom were firemen.
It hits me personally when any of our men are hurt or killed. And I don't know of any fire, any job that's more dangerous than the fire department.
The setting sun was replaced by the giant fireball that rose from the abandoned grain elevator at 32nd Place and Benson. Unused for many years, the 100-foot wooden structure towered over the south branch of the Chicago River. Even though separated by rail yards from the nearest structures, the combination of a southwest wind and intense radiant heat was enough to melt the siding on several houses and scorch the paint on nearby apparatus. In order to protect these exposures, The fire went to a 511 and 4 special alarms before being placed under control. Once again, Commissioner Quinn's men placed the new Snorkels around the building to effectively use their elevated master streams. Martin Luther King was murdered in Memphis on Thursday evening, April 4th, 1968. And by early afternoon Friday, the residents of the west side of Chicago had taken to the streets. The looting began almost immediately, and the outnumbered police could do little but watch. A carnival-like atmosphere prevailed all afternoon and into the night. The looters claimed it was simply an expression of their righteous indignation over King's assassination. Even before the fires began, Chicago officials had requested help from the Illinois National Guard, but it would be hours before the first troops arrived. By 4 o'clock, the stores were looted, and 2 miles of Madison Street, from Western Avenue to Pulaski Road, were burning. At Fire Main, the situation was frantic, but still under control. The worst was yet to come. Firefighters, operating over 100 fire engines, did their best, but the rioters were starting fires faster than the fire department could put them out. As night came, the police concentrated their efforts on trying to protect the rest of the city from the rioters and left the fire department to fend for itself. By dark, the riots had spread south to West Roosevelt Road, leaving fires burning out of control from Kedzie to Pulaski.
Central Park. There's no companies on their office. Get somebody in there. We're sending the 28th Battalion Truck 48 of Fog Pressure 1 on the way in there now on the 3600 block of 16th Street. Engine 23 to Main. 23, go ahead. We're picking up from Roosevelt and Kedzie. There's another fire just started in the rear of 3214 Roosevelt. We're picking. Okay, 441 to Main. 441.
The firefighters had been dodging rocks and bottles all day, but as night wore on, the shooting began.
7 to Main, 47. There's some police here, they're shooting around here. At 15th and Kedzie. Okay, 15 and Kedzie. 39 and 47 are both let out on this. Okay, we'll give it the police 47. 216 to Main. 216. 16 to Main. In my opinion, we need more police protection on Roosevelt from Kedzie West. Roosevelt and Kedzie West, okay.
The National Guard began to arrive Friday evening and were issued ammunition. By Saturday morning, the National Guard was on the street in force. While supporting the police, the Guard exchanged shots with snipers on the upper floors of the Cabrini Green housing project. the police finally rushed the building and made several arrests to end the shooting. At Mayor Daley's request, President Johnson ordered federal troops to Chicago. The battle-hardened veterans of Vietnam from Fort Carson and Fort Hood unloaded so quickly that the engines on the huge transports were never shut off. On April 7th, Palm Sunday, the regular army took up positions and the riot ended. The combination of 11,000 police, 7,000 National Guardsmen, and 5,000 federal troops finally brought peace to the burned-out West Chicago ghetto. At least 10 lives had been lost, 500 people injured, and 3,000 arrests made during the 3 days of rioting. The total property losses exceeded $10 million. To prevent further death or injury, heavy equipment was brought in to knock down the still smoldering wreckage. From the cockpit of the fire department helicopter, the pilot saw the towering smokehead from the fire on North Elston Avenue. Although dozens of engines and trucks were dispatched to the 511, none was more unique than Truck 9, a 54 FWD. It was one of the last of the wooden aerials. When the original stick failed in 1963, the CFD shops replaced it with a 100-foot steel ladder built by Seagrave. Although hoses were stretched to plugs in all directions, there was still not enough water to bring the fire under control. In typical Chicago fashion, the Snorkels were well positioned and delivering the needed fire streams. The box plant contained numerous firewalls, and the truck companies attempted to ventilate the uninvolved areas of the complex to permit the engine companies to advance interior hose lines and cut off the fire. The enormous box plant stretched all the way to the north branch of the Chicago River and covered an entire city block. The situation continued to deteriorate as the fire took possession of more and more of the huge structure. Breaking through the roof, the flames ignited an empty wooden water tank. Both Engine 31, the fireboat Medill, and Engine 41, the Bussy, had been dispatched. On arrival, both boats immediately put their guns to work and also supply additional water to the land companies. Still short of water, the CFD turned to the seldom-used cistern system and had two engines hook up with their hard suction hoses and draft.